Welcome back to Monitors Unboxed. Today we're reviewing two brand new 34-inch ultrawides that use the very latest next generation QD-OLED panel. We've already taken an in-depth look at this panel's improvements in a separate video, but today I'll be deep diving into the monitors themselves. They are the Asus ROG Swift PG34WCDN and the MSI PG34WCQR X36. Both use the same panel and should be available shortly. This new QD-OLED panel is 34 inches in size. It features a 3440 by 1440 resolution with a 21:9 aspect ratio. It has an 1800R curvature, 360Hz maximum refresh rate with VRR, and it's display HDR True Black 500 certified. Let's get into the testing after a word from our CES sponsors. Thanks to MSI for sponsoring our CES coverage. Check out MSI's gaming desktops, inside of which you'll find powerful AMD Ryzen or Intel Core Ultra processors, NVIDIA GeForce RTX graphics with ray tracing and DLSS, and the latest connectivity, including up to PCIe Gen 5 SSDs, Wi-Fi 7, and 5GB LAN. MSI's Silent Storm cooling AI uses smart fan algorithms and separated airflow chambers, combined with up to 360mm AIOs, to keep temperatures low and minimize noise under load. There's tempered glass side panels, clean interiors, and excellent designs to choose from. Learn more about MSI's gaming desktops via the links in the description.
Also supporting our CES coverage is Thermal Grizzly and their Cryo Sheet, an excellent alternative to thermal pastes, and because they don't use any liquid, they can never dry out. These graphene thermal pads offer very high thermal conductivity, are easy to use, are extremely durable, and can be used to maximize your CPU and/or GPU's cooling performance. So for more information, please check the links in the video description. We'd also like to thank Endorphy, creators of the award-winning Fluctus fans, available in both 120 and 140mm. These high-performance fans are designed to move air efficiently in dense spaces, with focused airflow and reduced noise. Perfect for CPU, power supplies, PC cases, and more. So to learn more, please click the links in the video description.
So these two monitors from Asus and MSI use a brand new QD-OLED panel from Samsung Display. I go into more details on this panel in a separate video, but let's quickly recap the main benefits and improvements this panel provides if you end up purchasing a PG34WCDN or 341CQR X36. The big change is the move away from the triangle RGB subpixel layout of previous QD-OLEDs to a traditional RGB stripe layout. This significantly improves text rendering quality, as the RGB stripe layout is identical to LCDs and works perfectly with subpixel font rendering that's designed for RGB stripe. You won't see any of the pink-green fringing artifacts that were previously seen on QD-OLED monitors. Text looks fantastic on this new panel, equivalent to LCDs of a similar pixel density. This new panel does not bring any resolution improvements over its predecessors. It's still 3440 by 1440 at 110 pixels per inch, so it's not as sharp as 4K class displays. But the change in subpixel layout is effectively like an increase in resolution when it comes to text rendering, so browsing the web or using desktop apps is now much nicer on this 1440p class QD-OLED. The screen coating and layer composition has also been improved to reduce ambient light reflectivity compared to previous QD-OLEDs. This has been a major issue with QD-OLEDs for some time. In brighter environments, this panel type reflects light, which leads to raised blacks that appear grey or even slightly tinted purple. The new ultra-wide QD-OLED for 2026 reduces reflected light in these conditions and significantly reduces the purple tint, meaning it handles ambient light the best of any QD-OLED so far. However, the improvements here fall short of fixing this problem entirely. Glossy WOLED panels still handle ambient light noticeably better, with deeper blacks in bright conditions. QD-OLEDs handle direct reflections better, so the panel has less of a mirror-like finish, but I still think WOLED panels look better overall and have deeper blacks in more lighting conditions. When comparing the Asus and MSI models that use this panel, it's important to be aware that they both have the exact same screen coating. Asus and MSI use different branding to refer to the black depth and hardness improvements of this new QD-OLED panel. With Asus, it's True Black Film, and with MSI, it's Pure Black. But really, these are the same thing. The new coating is definitely better than previous QD-OLED ultrawides, but the Asus model is not better than the MSI or vice versa. The design for both models is very good, befitting of a high-end screen. The OLED panel section is thin, with a central box housing the components on the rear. The overall shape is quite similar on both, and we see RGB LED lighting from each brand, with Asus using a more prominent integration into their logo. Plastic is used for the housing, though overall I think the Asus model is a bit better in terms of build quality. The surface finish to the plastic is of a higher quality, and I just prefer the way it looks. The stand is a different story. Both models offer height tilt and swivel support, but I prefer the MSI stand base, which is more compact thanks to the use of a flat metal plate. The Asus pronged leg design is decent, especially because it uses metal as well, but it uses more space for no real stability advantage, and the projected logo out of the base is a bit silly. Both models feature a similar port selection. There's one DisplayPort 2.1a port, two HDMI 2.1 48 gigabits per second ports, and a USB-C supporting DP alt mode and power delivery. There's a small spec difference in power delivery between the models, 98 watts on the MSI and 90 watts on the Asus, while the Asus has one additional port in its USB hub. 3440 by 1440 at 360Hz is supported in a range of configurations, including over HDMI 2.1 with DSC and over DisplayPort in the 1.4 mode with DSC, so older GPUs should have no issues accessing the full capabilities of this panel. However, there is a DisplayPort spec difference between the models. The Asus uses UHBR20, while the MSI uses UHBR 13.5. This means only the Asus model can run the full 360Hz without DSC. On the MSI monitor, the maximum supported refresh rate without DSC is 240Hz. Speaking of the OSD menu, both monitors use a directional toggle with an easy-to-navigate interface. You'll find a variety of gaming features on both monitors, such as an FPS counter, crosshair, and sniper mode. There's also a similar range of color controls, both have KVM switch options and DSC toggles, and there's a wide range of OLED care features available on each model. The MSI variant gives you more control over the OLED care features with the ability to adjust the timing of each feature and how much effect they have, whereas on the Asus model, each care feature is a simple on-off toggle. The main differences in terms of OSD features are as follows. The Asus model gives you more control over color spaces with fully unlocked sRGB and DCI-P3 modes. The MSI model has modes for these color spaces but don't allow you to adjust all settings. The Asus option also comes with a uniform brightness toggle, which is disabled by default. The MSI model gives you uniform brightness in the SDR mode at all times with no available toggle. One of the bigger differences is the availability of an OLED anti-flicker mode, which you get with the Asus PG34WCDN, but isn't available on the MSI version. When enabled, the variable refresh rate minimum is raised from 48 to 240 Hz, but unfortunately this means low frame rate compensation is disabled, so if your game dips below 240 FPS, variable refresh will stop working. This is a disappointing regression compared to other Asus monitors that supported anti-flicker, where the minimum refresh was raised but still offered LFC support. I suspect Asus may change this with a firmware update, but for now it's not worth using. The other difference is how Asus and MSI handle presence detection, a feature that allows the display to automatically switch to black when you're not in front of it, helping to extend the lifespan of the OLED panel. Asus use a proximity sensor for this, whereas MSI use a presence detection camera, and each method has its strengths and weaknesses. The Asus Neo proximity sensor is faster, the screen will instantly turn back on when it detects you have returned, whereas the MSI AI Care sensor in its self-contained monitor mode takes about 10 seconds to power the monitor back on. The MSI monitor does use less power in this mode, but it comes at the cost of speed, and I find its slowness to be quite annoying. However, the MSI option also allows you to run in system mode that hooks up to Windows 11's presence detection feature over USB, which is more responsive and switches the display back on faster, though still slightly slower than the Asus. This mode can also switch off the display as soon as you leave, whereas the Asus model only turns off the display after a minimum of 5 minutes. Of course, you can also increase the MSI AI Care sensor turn-off delay if you like. Back when I tested this MSI presence detection feature at Computex 2025, it was pretty janky and didn't seem great at detecting people, but on this monitor in my office, it actually worked quite reliably. In addition, the sensor supports adaptive brightness and color temperature based on the environment you're in, which the Asus model does not support at all. OLED panels of all varieties are susceptible to permanent burn-in. You won't get burn-in while playing games or watching videos, but the panel will burn in over time when displaying static content for long periods. This makes OLED less well suited for productivity uses, where you'll be looking at static desktop apps all day, and you can check out our ongoing OLED burn-in series to see how real-world productivity use affects burn-in. The occasional amount of static app usage is fine, so don't worry about doing a bit of web browsing between gaming sessions. I just wouldn't recommend OLED as a monitor for hours of work. Now, in terms of motion performance, the key new feature with these 2026 ultrawide monitors is the increase in refresh rate from 240Hz on previous gen models to 360Hz now. Response times are unchanged compared to previous OLEDs, so we're still getting the usual lightning fast speeds that blow LCDs out of the water. This makes OLED clearer than an LCD at the same refresh rate. 360Hz OLED is roughly equivalent to 540Hz LCD, which isn't even available in this panel format. There's no artifacts from overshoot, and you don't need to worry about changing the settings depending on the refresh rate you're using. From a response time perspective, OLED is a much more ideal technology than LCD. With OLEDs, motion clarity is directly tied to refresh rate, so a higher refresh rate model delivers better clarity when the highest refresh rate is used. But as I've talked about in countless reviews, if you operate two different OLEDs at the same refresh rate, motion clarity will be identical, regardless of what the maximum refresh rate actually is. So for example, if you were to buy this new 360Hz model, but you were running games at 120 FPS/120Hz, motion clarity would be the same on the new model as the older models that had a maximum 175Hz refresh rate. There's no difference in response times between 360, 240, and 175Hz QD-OLEDs, so the refresh rate you're using is key. Compared to the original 175Hz models, the upgrade to 360Hz is pretty significant. It's slightly more than double the refresh rate, which at a minimum for desktop apps is much nicer to use, it's more responsive and smoother. Motion clarity is twice as good, so if you're playing the sorts of games that hit 360 FPS, think fast-paced, lightweight multiplayer titles, this new QD-OLED will be much clearer than old ultrawides playing the same games at 175Hz. You'll also benefit from lower input latency because the display is updated with fresh images twice as fast, and there's much more headroom for frame generation in single-player titles. Compared to previous 240Hz monitors, the shift up to 360Hz is good, but not as revolutionary. It's a 50% higher refresh rate, so motion clarity and input lag is definitely better, but it's not a key feature that I'd upgrade for if I already owned a 240Hz OLED, especially given these latest QD-OLEDs are expensive premium displays. As both the MSI and Asus models have the same refresh rate capabilities, motion performance is the same. Input latency is excellent. I recorded a 0.1 millisecond processing delay on both monitors, which is top tier. The only way you'll get better latency on a modern monitor is something with an even higher refresh rate. You get the same processing delay in the HDR mode, making these displays ideal for responsive HDR gaming. Input latency at a fixed 60Hz was higher on the MSI model though, without being terrible on either option. Power consumption, pretty similar on the new 360Hz QD-OLEDs to previous QD-OLED Ultrawides, coming in at 86 watts to display full screen 200 nit wide image, a worst case result for this panel tech. While gaming, power consumption is typically much lower and more like a normal display, though the latest 360Hz panel does use a bit more power than the AW3425DW at 240Hz, as OLEDs have higher power requirements at higher refresh rates. The change in panel structure for these new QD-OLED Ultrawides has not affected the color gamut. We're still getting 98% coverage of DCI-P3, and Rec 2020 coverage is about 78%, quite similar to other QD-OLED panels. The previous ultrawide models were slightly higher in the 80 to 82% range, but either way, we're looking at quite a solid result. Factory calibration is quite similar on both monitors, offering average grayscale results with a good color temperature. Like a lot of wide gamut gaming monitors, the color space is left unclamped for SDR use, leading to oversaturation in content like YouTube videos. This is more noticeable than usual on QD-OLED monitors due to their wide color gamut, so if you see sunburned-like skin tones out of the box, this is why. In this chart, comparing these monitors to others, both are mid-tier with quite similar results. In Color Checker, they are on the lower end of the scale, but still similar to other models. When using Windows 11 Auto Color Management, both monitors have effective sRGB gamut emulation and deliver improved results with a Color Checker Delta E ITP average near 5.0, which is decent. There's no major difference here between the models. sRGB mode accuracy is also very similar on the MSI and Asus variants, with both brands providing excellent factory calibration. Here I'm using the sRGB Cal mode on the Asus model, though a less accurate mode that allows you to change other settings is also available. When looking at the overall chart, the MSI model is better than the Asus in grayscale, though both are towards the top of the chart, while in Color Checker I got near identical numbers. SDR Brightness is improved with this latest ultra-wide panel, bringing full screen results up to 305 nits. This is similar to the 1440p 500Hz QD-OLED panel I tested last year. Both that panel and this 2026 ultra-wide are Display HDR True Black 500 certified, and one of the criteria for that spec is at least 300 nits full screen. This is a 22% increase on previous ultra-wide OLEDs that sat around 250 nits max. Minimum brightness is lower on the Asus model, but the MSI is also very good at 34 nits. Viewing angles are of course very good, as we've come to love from OLEDs. Uniformity is excellent as well, with no dirty screen issues or color banding, which can be problematic on WOLED alternatives. Moving now into the HDR section, and OLEDs are a great choice for HDR, as many people will already know. The main strengths to this panel type are individual pixel control and zero-level blacks, which create high levels of local contrast. With such fine control over the image, OLEDs can display amazing contrast even if a bright and dark area are right next to each other. Combined with rapid response times and low input lag, OLEDs keep up with the demands of fast-paced HDR gaming without introducing artifacts or delay. The main weakness to OLED for HDR is overall brightness, especially in brighter, high APL scenes. LCDs with zone backlights are the main alternative to OLED. These types of panel get brighter than OLED and don't have burn-in concerns, which might be better suited to your preferences. However, they lack individual pixel control, which in unfavorable scenarios leads to reduced contrast, zone artifacts, and in some cases, weak highlight brightness. Zoned LCDs also have higher input lag, and the backlight can struggle in fast HDR games. The best LCDs still deliver a great overall HDR experience, but OLEDs are typically a better and more premium option for gamers. Both the Asus PG34WCDN and MSI 341CQR X36 offer similar HDR modes and configurations. There's a True Black mode with up to 500 nits of peak brightness, labeled Display HDR 500 True Black on the Asus and True Black 500 on the MSI. There's a peak mode that raises the brightness ceiling to 1300 nits, that's called Console HDR on the Asus and peak 1300 nits on the MSI, and then both models offer a setting that attempts to defeat panel dimming called Dynamic Brightness Boost on Asus and EOTF Boost on MSI. Yes, panel dimming in the brightest configuration is still an issue with this generation of QD-OLEDs. Aside from these standard configurations, MSI also offer a unique feature, which is adjustable EOTF curves in both the True Black and Peak modes. When you enable this feature, you can turn down brightness at various window sizes, which isn't something I'd personally do, but it might be useful. MSI and Asus both offer adjustable overall brightness in their HDR modes, but only MSI gives you this level of control. I think this feature would be a bit more useful if it allowed you to, say, adjust roll-off at high brightness as well, rather than just brightness versus window size, but it's a step in the right direction. The True Black mode is pretty accurate on both models. Asus more strictly follows the correct EOTF curve, whereas MSI implement gentle roll-off in this mode. There's no panel dimming here, but peak brightness is limited to 500 nits. The peak configurations are almost identical. At a 2% window, I saw up to 1300 nits of brightness with accurate EOTF tracking in darker scenes, but as we look at brighter scenes, we see panel dimming, which in some circumstances can halve the brightness of the entire scene compared to what it should be, when the overall picture level is high. This is very similar to what we've seen on previous QD-OLEDs when used in the peak configuration. Asus's solution for panel dimming is a feature called Dynamic Brightness Boost, or DBB, which is enabled by default in the gaming HDR mode as well. This feature looks at the signal input and dynamically adjusts the EOTF curve to compensate for panel dimming. When enabled, you can actually see this system working in real time, because in some scenes you can see the panel ramp up or down the brightness level, which can be a bit distracting. It also makes the wrong decisions at times. For example, here in the 2% test, it has boosted brightness above where it should be, and there's some wonkiness in the high APL test as well, due to the dynamic nature of how this mode operates. It's a solution we've seen before on some of Asus's 2025 releases. It's not fantastic, and it doesn't properly fix the issue. MSI's solution for panel dimming is their EOTF boost mode. However, the implementation of this on this ultra-wide is far less effective than what I saw with the 500Hz QD-OLED last year. Instead of dynamically reversing the panel dimming through EOTF adjustments, this implementation just seems to be a small brightness boost overall. This leads to slightly higher brightness than the regular peak 1300 nits mode, but in real content I still confirmed that panel dimming is possible. Unfortunately, this means that once again, we're in a position where there is no single perfect HDR mode available on either of these monitors. Ultimately, you'll have to make a choice between better overall HDR accuracy provided by the True Black modes, or higher peak brightness with panel dimming in the peak modes. I personally prefer the way the peak modes look in general, but ideally by now, this issue would have been fixed, especially as these displays use a brand new panel, so it's quite disappointing. In synthetic brightness tests, both of these new monitors are capable of up to 310 nits full screen, which is higher than previous ultra-wide OLEDs that topped out around 260 nits. 10% window brightness now hits as high as 530 nits, putting it in line with 500Hz QD-OLED and higher than previous QD-OLEDs. However, WOLED technology is clearly better here. The 240Hz ultra-wide panel used in the PG34WCDN, very similar name, hits 785 nits. 2% window brightness now hits up to 1300 nits in the peak configurations, which is excellent. This is slightly higher than the 1200 nits ultra-wide WOLEDs can achieve and 30% higher than past QD-OLED panels. Primary RGB tandem WOLED is still the leading position among gaming monitors, at least as far as OLEDs go, but this is nevertheless a fantastic result. Comparing the true black mode of this new panel to previous ultrawides in real scene HDR brightness, we see a 15% higher result on average, which is a nice baseline. In the peak modes, I saw about the same increase on average, though in the best cases, highlight brightness can be 30% higher than past QD-OLEDs, which is decent. This makes this new ultrawide panel slightly brighter than 500Hz 1440p QD-OLED due to increased peak brightness. And while the panel is competitive with the latest primary RGB tandem WOLED panels, WOLED still holds the overall crown in our real scene testing. In HDR color accuracy, the Asus model tends to be slightly better calibrated than the MSI across the various modes, but it depends where I look as both models are quite similar overall. Color volume is also very similar and a little higher than past ultrawides thanks to higher peak brightness capabilities. Lastly, I just want to make brief mention of these monitor names, which are terrible. PG34WCDN is very similar to PG34WCDM, another monitor that Asus makes but with a WOLED panel. The last letter here, M or N, which themselves are quite similar, determines which panel technology you get. So that's not great, that's really confusing for buyers. MPG341CQR X36 isn't much better, it's clumsy, it's long, and very similar to their previous model, the 341CQP. So these both should have unique names. These are not good. Ultimately, the Asus ROG Swift PG34WCDN and MSI MPG341CQR X36 are both excellent ultrawide gaming monitors with genuine improvements compared to their predecessors. The brand new Samsung Display QD-OLED panel they use is the best version of this technology yet, and I'd be happy recommending either of these monitors to people after a high-end ultrawide experience. The shift to an RGB striped subpixel layout has improved text rendering and removed artifacts that were seen on previous QD-OLED panels. This is the best 1440p class OLED panel I've seen for text quality. It's fantastic for desktop use with clarity equivalent to LCDs. Ambient light reflectivity has been improved as well, and while it's not a fully solved problem, blacks are noticeably deeper compared to first-gen panels. Bumping this 3440x1440 panel up to 360Hz makes these the fastest and clearest ultrawides on the market. Of course, response times are excellent, as they are for all OLEDs, but the increased refresh rate gives gamers even more headroom, especially for multiplayer titles. With more than double the refresh rate of the original 175Hz models, this is a genuine upgrade on first-gen units, especially when combined with the improvements to text quality, screen coating, and brightness. That sort of upgrade path isn't going to be for everyone because those original QD-OLEDs are still great screens, but this is the first monitor of the same format that presents as a suitable upgrade choice for those that want to stay on the bleeding edge. The HDR experience is as good as ever with OLED benefits such as per pixel control and deep zero level blacks. Brightness has been improved by a moderate amount compared to older QD-OLED ultrawides, now hitting up to 1300 nits, making this the brightest ultrawide OLED panel on the market. Unfortunately though, panel dimming is still an issue in the brightest HDR mode, which absolutely should have been fixed by now. The Asus and MSI models are remarkably similar in their overall performance, with both offering good factory calibration and near identical HDR accuracy. In terms of how the panel looks and performs, there's nothing separating these models really. They work really well and look great for all sorts of gaming. So if panel quality is your number one concern, you'll be satisfied with either version. There are some differences here, but it's on the stuff around the edges. For example, the Asus model offers DisplayPort 2.1 UHBR20, an unlocked sRGB mode, a mediocre implementation of OLED anti-flicker, and proximity sensor-based presence detection, which are all exclusive to their model. MSI offer adjustable HDR brightness curves, greater control over OLED care features, a better stand base, and a more advanced presence detection system as exclusives. This is a highly competitive feature set with no clear and obvious standout. As of the time of putting together this video, and we did need to do it before CES because we are flying out for that in a moment, I know the price of the MSI monitor but not the Asus monitor. The 341CQR X36 will launch in February at a price of $1,100 US. If it's available for less than the Asus model, the choice is clear, just get the MSI version. If the Asus version is cheaper, that's the way I'd personally lean. And if both models launch at the same price, I'd probably slightly lean towards the MSI model, but this is a really close battle. The other question is whether this latest QD-OLED Ultrawide is worth $1,100 US compared to other ultrawide options. Right now, you can get the previous gen, well, now previous gen, Dell Alienware AW3425DW, which has a 240Hz refresh rate, for $800 US. So we're looking at a 38% premium to get the MSI model instead of this Alienware, which is quite a hefty premium. If the only thing the MSI offered was a higher refresh rate, I'd say absolutely not, just get the cheaper 240Hz model. But there's a lot of new stuff included with this monitor. In this sort of premium category, I'd be more inclined to spend the extra money and get the better overall product. Of course, there's also the option of waiting. I suspect there will be quite a few monitors using this panel and a lot of competition, bringing the price down over time. So anyway, that's it for this review. If you do appreciate this testing, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Links to that is in the description below. Also, if it does come time to purchase one of these monitors and have used our video as your main source of information and guidance towards making that purchase, we do have links to buy these monitors down below. They're affiliated, all that sort of usual stuff that applies with that. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.